Great to be with you here Friday afternoon. Hot as all Dickens, as you heard Heidi talking about there in the news. And Joe, I don't know about you, but I'm looking forward to wrapping the week up.
Mm-hmm.
I'm especially looking forward because we knew this was going to happen because the first administration was similar to this, and we knew that the second administration is just a fire hose of chaos. There's constant new news coming out every single day. We remember that from 2017 through the beginning of 21, and of course, is happening again today. The latest news that is coming out of Washington, and some of it coming out of El Salvador, I guess, although not coming out fast enough from El Salvador, is you recall this guy from Maryland. He is a U.S. resident, right? So he's got his green card.
Yep.
And he got deported. And the administration, they sent him to that prison in El Salvador, which they say is the dark hole of human rights violations.
HE double hockey sticks. Yeah, not a pleasant place to be.
So this, obviously people are upset. They're like, what are you doing with this guy? You can't do that. He has no criminal background. There's nothing like this. The administration admitted in court, yeah, that was an administrative error. We boogered that one up. So the judge said, get him back here. And they went, before we do that, why don't we appeal this to the Supreme Court? And then you think, why? And they go, well, he might be MS-13. We don't know that he's not. He's got a tattoo of a crown. And so that could be. And the guy goes, I like Real Madrid, the soccer team, right? And he goes, it would be like having a Raiders tattoo. And they're like, he's a pirate. He's got the tattoo. And you go, really? Is that where we're going? So anyway, the guy's stuck in this hellhole in El Salvador. Supreme Court says, yeah, you got to get him back here. But then they told the lower courts, they said, you guys figure out how to get him back here. But also, don't forget, this is the executive branch. This is still the White House. So don't go run roughshod and deciding that you're going to determine all
Yeah, he doesn't have to be back tomorrow.
Well,
just work on it.
They wanted to make sure that the judge wasn't going to issue some sort of an order that usurped the president's authority to enforce immigration or foreign policy sort of thing, right? So then this morning, this was yesterday, the court said you got to do this. So then the federal judge said, all right, I want your plans by 9:30. And 9:30 rolls around, and the White House lawyers said, we don't really have anything.
Well, we'll get back to you.
They said, we're on the clock. We can't come up with a plan that fast. What are you, crazy? And the judge is not happy about this.
I'm sure.
Joining me right now is the attorney at Barton Mendez Soto. It is Jim Barton joining us in the studio. And Jim, great to have you in here. Thank you so much for being a part of this. Are we facing a constitutional crisis? That phrase gets overblown all the time. But are we facing a constitutional crisis with a judge saying one thing and the administration saying, yeah, we're not going to do that?
We are facing a constitutional crisis. And the judiciary doesn't have an army. The judiciary doesn't even really have cops. I guess they have some court guys, right?
Yeah.
So the only way that the rule of law works is if the participants in government respect the rule of law. And this thing that you've been talking about is exactly the sort of ridiculous behavior that we've seen from the administration. And now we have a clear violation of law. The judge has ruled, the Supreme Court has ruled, and they're just flaunting it. And it is a disaster. I mean, that's the difference between us and tyranny, is whether or not the government follows the law.
Is there recourse for this guy that got deported? Now, by the way, he's not necessarily going to be off the hook. I mean, the White House could still say, we want to deport you. It's just now they have to give him due process, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, the recourse for him is what his lawyers have done, which is said, let's bring him back here so we can have the hearings and we can have the trial and we can talk about what you were talking about, the evidence. Yeah. I mean, we saw some of that in Sotomayor's dissent in one of these other cases where she's like, one of these guys, he just said, I have tattoos. Like, it has nothing to do with anything. And he never got a chance to put on that evidence. And so the only recourse you have is to put on evidence in a court. And that doesn't happen if the government doesn't follow the law.
If the government concedes, Jim, that an administrative error in sending this gentleman to El Salvador occurred, how is he not immediately returned to the U.S.?
It is maddening, and I think it is. You see this stuff in like lower levels of legal work, where you'll have an order and someone just won't follow the order, or whether you have a case that starts and somebody's like ducking service. And for me, I have some clients that do that kind of work too, where we're just trying to like win an employment law case, and somebody will say, "Well, Jim, why aren't you doing anything?" I'm like, "Well, I'm not a superhero. All I can do is do the process," and that is something that happens in law. To have the President of the United States say, I'm not going to follow the law is miraculous. I mean, it's not the first time, right? I mean, when we were resettling indigenous peoples and the horrible Trail of Tears. There's a famous quote where, Andrew Jackson says, the court's made its ruling, now let its army enforce it.
Yeah.
That's the level of evil we're talking about right now.
Jim Barton is attorney at Barton Mendez Soto, and he joins us in the studio right now. What, politically speaking, and you don't have to, I know you're a lawyer, you're not a political analyst, but at some point, though, is there an advantage to fighting this order? I mean, is there a tactic that we might be seeing here? Is this, even if they lose this, do they win a larger battle against other people who might be worried about being deported that may self-deport them? I mean, what's the logic behind doing this?
Well, you're right. I'm not a politician, and I would never presume to get into the logic of the Trump administration, which is certainly beyond my grasp. But I will say you have identified an extra level of danger here, which is one of the ways that tyranny succeed is by preemptive obedience, where people sort of self-regulate, self-deport, self-censor. And when you see something like this, where you see the President of the United States will not even follow the rule of law from the United States Supreme Court, I suppose that does have an opportunity to terrorize people. I mean, it's really important for people in my job to push back and to say, hey, we're lawyers, and I see he's going after lawyers, but we've got to keep pushing, even if it now is kind of scary for us sometimes.
Jim Barton, attorney at Barton Mendez Soto, joins us right now. Jim, I saw the Innocence Protection Act, I had to look this up this morning, provides compensation up to $50,000 a year if you're incarcerated for a non-capital crime and twice that for capital crimes for those who are wrongly convicted of federal crimes. Does Mr. Garcia, in this case, the gentleman who's been deported to El Salvador, have a case? And could it rise beyond that $50,000? Or is that it?
Well, I suppose a smart personal injury lawyer could probably do something with this. I think you're right about that, which basically allows the government to be access to a tort. That's the real point of that. I mean, you would always have access to a tort, but we need a law to say the government is the sovereign, has access to a tort. So, yeah, maybe somewhere down the road he has access to something like that. It's pretty hard to do, and I feel like sometimes a discussion about that can sort of cloud the conversation, because this guy could be in El Salvador and dead long before any attorney has taken his case on some novel issue of sort of restoring a financial benefit. That is hard to do. There's a misconception that it's easy to get money from these types of situations. Yeah. It is not easy.
What about the family? Let's follow your hypothetical. Let's say something, God forbid, happens to him while he's there waiting for the government to get off their hands. I mean, does the family have any recourse?
They would. The family would have standing to raise a claim on that behalf, both based on the act that you talked about and in just sort of general civil actions. There are people, it should be known, the people who are doing these things, the people who are perpetrating these crimes. Donald Trump is not perpetrating these crimes by himself. He has actors who are doing it. There is opportunities within the law to hold those people accountable for doing things that are clearly unconstitutional, that no one would think is an acceptable practice. Again, that's a 5, 6, 7 year thing that we're talking about. Right. But it is available.
Jim Barton is an attorney at Barton Mendez Soto. And now imagine deporting somebody on a permanent resident status. That's enough, it makes you raise your eyebrows, right? It does, of course, concern people who are worried about the rule of law and due process. But let's be straight. Most of us, the drama's playing out somewhere else. Doesn't really concern us other than as observers. I mean, we're U.S. citizens, right? None of this drama applies to us, right? Right? Maybe not. Get your papers in order. It's next on the Chris and Joe Show. In studio with us right now is attorney with Barton Mendez Soto. Jim Barton is here. And Jim, we were just talking about this El Salvadorian. Well, he's a Salvadorian citizen, but he's a U.S. resident, meaning he's got his green card, right? So he ends up getting picked up, shipped off to this El Salvadorian hellhole prison. So he's there right now. The courts have said bring him back. The White House says, that's a lot of work for us to figure that whole thing out. We're going to need more time. Meanwhile, he's kind of rotting away. And we think, well, this is terrible. What a horrible thing. But as a U.S. citizen, I don't have anything to worry about. And yet I see that the White House is floating this idea of the potential for deporting U.S. citizens who, according to Caroline Leavitt, who's the press secretary, she says that such a punishment would only be appropriate for offenders with heinous and violent convictions and those who repeatedly commit crimes. So repeat offenders of the worst is what it sounds like to me. Is there any legal basis for that in modern times? Because I know, for Pete's sake, that's what Australia was born with. Australia was a penal colony,
that's
right?
Fair enough. No, there's no legal basis, and under the law, to deport a U.S. citizen, even a citizen who has been convicted of crime, even a citizen who's been convicted of a real bad crime. But I will say what we're seeing here is we're seeing what the White House does is it floats these ideas of outrageous things and it sort of sees how they play. And then we'll see some follow-up. And so it should upset anyone to read that. I mean, the idea that we would start deporting citizens is horrifying and evil, and it's not, and it's the kind of thing that should raise everyone's ire.
So how, Jim, I can't believe I'm even asking this. If it's not legal, how could it even happen? How could Chris end up in El Salvador?
How could we float the idea? Why would we even float the idea?
Well, let's talk about a way that we know already how you could end up in El Salvador. They could accidentally arrest you and then have an administrative error where you end up in El Salvador.
Okay.
And then they could tell the court, sorry, it's El Salvador. They're a sovereign nation, something that they've already said.
Yeah.
And oopsie, we shouldn't have sent you to El Salvador. Our bad, but we can't tell them to bring you back. So that's actually a very clear blueprint of how a U.S. citizen could be deported and stay there indefinitely.
What qualifies as repeat offender or heinous and violent? Joe and I were talking about this earlier. You said is a burglary where they really toss your stuff, is that violent?
Well,
I said I think there has to be a physical crime committed, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
how's that defined?
There's a body of law on all those things. So repeat offender is a body of law that goes to when they do making crimes a higher penalty available. Heinous and depraved is a particular thing they do to murders that they apply to murder question to decide whether you can or be eligible for the death penalty.
Okay.
And so heinous and depraved, there is some case law about it. It's very weird to talk about this now because we're sort of talking about how would you construct a law based on a comment from the president that's being weirdly defended by his press secretary. I mean, but the notion of identifying certain conduct as heinous and depraved it's present in the law.
All right. Is there room for fodder? Because one thing that we know is the president will float these wild ideas, and all of a sudden you have people that start going, I think that's a really great idea. I mean, for the Pete's sake, we saw the last week, he said, I'm going to put these massive tariffs on these countries. Countries, of course, then react, and we say, well, you can't punch us back. We're going to punch you harder now. And we saw people lining up saying, well, it had to happen. It's really great. And then the minute he says they're rolled back, they go, well, that was really smart. I mean, it doesn't matter what he says. People will go to the mat for him. Is there room for conversation here with people? Is there room for what Joe and I like to call interactive curiosity?
Well, yes, there seems to be a cult of personality around Trump that he's held people in no matter what he does. I can shoot people on Fifth Avenue, they'd still vote for me, which is...
I think he's right.
It's 100% right.
Yeah.
I think that's 100% borne out.
Yeah.
I don't know at what point people get fatigued from it, but we have seen it. And this idea of vilifying a particular group of people, let's go after people and let's say, oh, it's only going to be the real bad criminals, right? I mean, there were people in this country, frankly, people who have family that don't have documentation, who voted for Trump saying, and then when he started deporting working people, they said, I thought he was only going to deport the workers. I mean, the criminals.
Right.
And I don't know who believed that, but I mean, that happens. And so I think there's absolutely room for people to get on board for something like this, especially if you can dress it up with this nonsense about these like sort of unnamed criminals.
Yeah.
And now
very nebulous.
Very nebulous. And now we're deporting people that have a tattoo that looks like a Spanish soccer team or something?
Yeah, it's a
like,
crown.
A crown.
Insane, yeah.
So Jim Barton, attorney at Barton Mendez Soto, joins us right now. Let's say I wake up tomorrow morning and I find out this has happened to my dad. Not a criminal, never committed a crime in his life. What's the first thing I should do?
Well, I think you call a criminal lawyer to see if he can file something to get your dad out of wherever he is. So the one thing that's called is a habeas corpus petition. That's usually we do habeas corpus petitions when people are convicted of the death penalty and they've sort of done all their options, and it's like just before, and when they make that's federal. Habeas corpus is federal, so it makes it do it. But I think we're going to have some lawyers, some of these guys are some of the white collar guys who have sort of the high paying jobs, have the big white shoe law firms that can do the kind of research on it. But I think the starting place is a criminal lawyer or an immigration lawyer, but frankly, maybe a criminal lawyer, because when they're talking about wrongful arrest, a criminal lawyer is where you're going to need to be. I guess I would contact you guys, and I would contact others in the press. I mean, it hasn't happened so far. It hasn't been particularly successful, but I mean, at some point, like I said, you get to a point of the saturation, I would hope. But mostly, I don't have a real good answer for you, because I don't have a way to sort of walk away from when the government says we're not going to follow the law. The guys with the guns say we're not going to follow the law. There's not a great process for that.
There's not a lot of case history behind this either, right?
Right. There's not. I mean, there's ugly case here, the Commune and the Red Scare era where people were sort of disappeared without that. We have put a whole bunch of Japanese people in internment camp, I guess is the nicest way we want to say about it. And, the case, it's not case law exactly. It's just history of horror.
Mm. The whole thing scares the hell out of me.
I would like to say that it doesn't with me and that you think it's never going to happen.
Yeah.
But it, as we talked about a few minutes ago, it already did happen to a resident.
Right.
In the U.S. So what stops it from happening to a citizen?
Not a big leap to somebody who's a citizen. That's a good point.
No.
Yeah. All right. Jim Barton, attorney at Barton Mendez Soto. Jim, pleasure talking with you. Thank you so much for coming in here. We look forward to having you again.
You bet. Thank
you,
for
my
having
friend.
me.
Thanks for watching The Chris and Joe Show. Click to see more from Chris and Joe and tap the button in the middle to subscribe to KTAR News.